Thank you for joining us. Today we have Adam Jarczyn. So he's joining us from #paid. Previously he co-founded Hovr.it. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
So,
it's cool.
Before we kick it off, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah.
What have you done in the past and how did you get here today?
I started a company in 2013, 2012 called Hovr.it, which we were building image recognition technology that lived inside the browser. We ended up getting acquired by a company called Slyce out of Calgary at the end of 2013, so it was pretty, like, Hovr's life was actually pretty short, and we became kind of the product technology team with a very similar value prop of like, how do you use image recognition technology to make images searchable for products? So I could take a picture of your shoes or your shirt, and we're going to try to surface to you where you could buy that stuff. So I worked in that world of like image recognition as a service, let's call it, for 2 or 3 years. And at the end of my time there, I actually transitioned to a company called #paid, where I'm now the SVP of Operations and Product. And so #paid is an influencer marketing company, so we work with like major agencies and brands, helping them to execute influencer marketing campaigns into like Instagram and YouTube and all that, the social media sphere, and how do we use influencers to kind of communicate a message.
I read this quote or an opinion that product team is something that is somewhat expandable in a way that if, for example, tomorrow product management doesn't exist in a company, you won't necessarily feel it immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
If, for example, engineering team disappears, you won't be able to build anything.
Yeah.
If you don't have anybody selling, you won't be able to sell. But product is what basically distinguishes the company. Either they're gonna win in the long run or not. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I guess if the product team went away, you could probably be okay for a little bit. I mean, I find product kind of resides in 2 areas. Their goal should be to be collecting feedback about all users and business opportunities, and how that translates into a product or a new service or an expansion of what you're doing and what that is. So I think if your product team goes away, you will likely slow down in terms of like the evolution of your business. We're really focused on talking to customers and clients and users of our tools and understand like, why do they even care? Mm-hmm. Because you could come out with your first product and maybe there's some traction there, but like, unless you can really ask the right questions, you don't really know. So a lot of people, I think, in startup world, they show off about their organic growth, but I think organic growth is kind of it's a questionable subject because you don't know how anyone's coming. You don't know why they're discovering you. So let's say you wanted to start doing like optimizations on your landing pages and you want to have a particular value prop. You don't even know which value prop resonates because everyone's coming there on their own. So you don't know what the market is observing about you because you don't have a specific message. Another area is that, at least in my observation, like, development teams want to code. Behaviorally or personality-wise, they're not the most organized group of people. So like, your product people can go away, but you'll probably get disorganized pretty quick. I think the other thing that you want to look for in a good product set of people or a product manager, what have you, is like someone who's very good at pushing back, and someone who's a very analytical thinker. It's like, dev teams can definitely get pulled into building things that go nowhere. There's definitely a variety of value there, but like, oftentimes in very young companies, the CEO generally takes on the product role, and eventually when it becomes too much for him or her to manage, then they have to find someone to come in and continue moving it forward. I can definitely say that I'm continuing to pick up new skills and new habits that I think are making me more effective. Like, one of the things that we've started looking at is like, and it kind of sounds stupid, people ask like, how do you prioritize things in your backlog, or how do you prioritize the product? And I think if you have a strong product manager, he or she is going to be able to do it, but they won't be able to describe how they're doing it. And one thing that we've kind of started doing recently is like, we wanted to design a shared lexicon, let's call it, on how people prioritize everything, including product. And we kind of landed on a very simple framework of level of effort versus level of impact. Mm-hmm. So lots of great ideas come into the product team all the time. The feedback comes from everywhere, but like, those product people are responsible for evaluating what's the level of impact. So we have a clear set of like metrics we're trying to improve as a business, or level of impact being like, I want to drive an efficiency for a particular team in my company and I want to build a product around that. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to at least qualitatively define the level of impact. So is it going to be, let's say, high, medium, low? The other scale, it's called the x-axis, is going to be your level of effort. So how much work are you going to put into that in order to get that impact? And what we've ended up doing is taking like all the initiatives, whether they're we want to prioritize sales, we want to prioritize certain feature sets, we want to prioritize bug fixes, like you name it. And it kind of falls on this 3x3 grid, and then we prioritize accordingly.
And it's
so
just ranked from 0 to 10?
So it's like level of effort, high, level, low on vertical axis, level of impact, high level, or low, medium, high on the x-axis. And then like you literally just place a task into it and you say, okay, if something is like a high level of effort and low impact, like you don't even do it. Mm-hmm. And the neat thing about having that shared framework across the company is everyone gets it. Mm-hmm. So I've definitely observed a scenario where someone's like, hey, I have this issue, I really need it fixed, kind of thing. And like everything's dev work, so it's hard to push back on those things, but when you have a shared framework like that with everyone, it's like, look, I can work on it, but it's really like, this is a high level of effort for low impact, and like, I just can't justify working on that relative to all the other things that are, let's say, I've got a handful of low level of effort, high impact stuff. Like, it's very easy to have a conversation with your whole team around how to prioritize everything when you have that like shared framework.
Yeah, and is that something you guys would make public and put a pin even, you know, on the wall to, here's the request, here's where we pin it, so everybody can have this holistic overview of where the product is heading?
So we like use Trello, for example, for product management, but like all the teams are falling in line to using Trello. So there's like individual boards for each department, and every board is structured very similarly. So there's a series of tasks. So we'll have like lists. One list will be like low, medium, low, high, like for all the permutations of level of effort and level of impact. And then we place the tasks in there accordingly, and then we pull out, that's like your backlog as a whole. And then we pull tasks out of that backlog and actually start putting due dates and requirements gathering, all that kind of stuff. So like even the marketing team has a similar view into like, here are some of the initiatives we may want to take on in the next 6 months. This one is a high level of, like we have an example, I don't want to go into the details of the example, but like there was a lot of enthusiasm at #paid around a particular initiative. And it was a great idea, and it was just like, at the root of it, it was just cool.
Yeah.
But when you looked at it as in that framework, it's like the level of impact was super low and the level of effort was extremely high. And then at the stage of business where we're at right now, where it's growing quickly, there's only finite number of resources, like you need to be able to say, to put things on hold and be confident that that decision was the right one, and that framework definitely helps across the whole company, beyond product.
So in terms of kind of the impact, so obviously you have features maybe that will immediately unlock some revenue, where you can put a dollar value pretty immediately. But then there's always these long-term gut feeling, this is where we need to be going.
Yeah.
What kind of process do you go through to decide that impact of that gut feeling?
Yeah, I mean, there's a handful of things that we're currently not measuring. So again, I think it comes down to like where you are, and like if the discussion is really around startups, really it's like you got to look at like where you are as a business relative to like the degree of complexity and degree of sophistication you want to start exposing yourself to. I think early days, all those things are relatively low, except maybe the work that's happening in the dev team. But as you grow, you want to start adding certain levels of sophistication, and one of those levels of sophistication is trying to understand that. I think what we've done, again, using that framework, it just allows us to make sure that we're continually working on the right things. And like that level of sophistication is, here's a piece of the puzzle that like we don't have metrics around. Step one isn't let's improve this. Step one is like, let's go get the metrics we need. And so I think where we're at is like we're kind of identifying key areas of our onboarding funnel, key areas of unlocking revenue that allows us to say like, this is an area that we need to have better measurement around that we currently don't. So step one is measurement. So when we put that on, like coming back to like how we prioritize that, when we put that on a grid and we say level of effort versus level of impact, like those things always win, right? Being able to measure everything. So like we just did an implementation for like heap analytics, which just makes it super easy to be reactive with analytics. It's just been much stronger for us to say, here's a portion of the business. So like we'll look at like how we onboard clients or how we onboard influencers into our world. And we're like, okay, that onboarding, we need to understand it. It can't be just a gut. If we can't talk about it by analytics and numbers, then we're not talking about it. But there are places downstream in our process that we don't have any analytics around yet because we're not there. So I think you just have to look at like, is this a gut instinct thing? And the nice thing I think about product managers is like they're kind of trusted to be the gut check on something when you can't put numbers around it. You want to be as sophisticated as possible on the things that are really matter, and sophistication to me is like how much analytics I have on something, and how do I properly ask the right questions. Asking the right questions, I think, is where a lot of companies struggle. I don't think people are really good at asking questions. They're really good at coming up with answers. People love solutioning, like we're super guilty of that all the time. At least for me, I push back very hard on people when they're like, hey, I need a button, or I need this, or can this do this or that? And I'm like, if you can't describe to me the problem, I am not building anything for you.
Like if somebody comes to you with a product feedback, for example, from your sales team, do you give them kind of an easy guide of the questions that they should ask before they suggest feedback?
No. I mean, maybe if we got to a place where like that feedback was coming in such large volumes that we needed them to, like, let's say, fill out a form when they're doing like a feature request, for example. So the process that we do have is like all feature requests, all bug notices, anything like that, like we actually use Slack for it. We have a lot of automation set up through Zapier, for example, and I'm a big fan of Zapier, and we're zapped up like crazy. But step one, I think, is like building a process where that feedback comes in. So like internally or externally, people, like, we'll get communications back, and we'll, like, if you put hashtag bug or hashtag feature on a comment, it automatically goes into the backlog in Trello, and that's a place where we can start pulling these things out, and then we do like a user interview around that feedback. So we'll actually go out and let's say it's an internal piece of feedback, like, you know, as a salesperson, I need to be able to do X. We actually sit down with the person who provided the feedback, and we talk to them, okay, what is the problem? So we're very hands-on on that, less so about like, you know, fill out this form that to answer these questions, and then we'll get back to you. We just go right to them as quickly as we can. A big thing we try to focus on as well is like more user story centric features and bug fixes, rather than describing the specific thing, because again, a lot of the tasks end up sounding like solutions. Everyone just wants a solution like crazy, but they don't necessarily have a view of the whole product you're building, or the solution they're describing isn't actually going to solve the problem, or it's just the wrong solution altogether.
So recently we've gone through an exercise where we've outlined our core values for the product. So we have our company core values, how the entire company operates, but then we also created product values, just so that almost like it would accomplish almost the exact same thing as company values. If a product manager is left alone to figure out whether a certain feature should be built, they can do almost a test against those values. Have you seen companies do that? Do you guys employ these like product value strategies of like validating some of the ideas?
So the one thing that we do is like someone will provide us feedback. I mentioned that like someone will just put like, they'll write a note in Slack and put hashtag bug, and you'll get this notice that says like this is what someone's describing. Again, the first thing to do is like we convert that into a story, user story. So as a user, as an accounts person, as an influencer, as a brand, whatever it is, I blank, 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 whatever it is. And then we try to define all of it against, like, we say like, you know, who's requesting it, who's the beneficiary of this, what is the description, what is the issue, what is the impact on OKRs. So like we've implemented like an OKR framework, objectives and key results framework at #paid. When we have like company OKRs, so we have 5 key company OKRs that are like the guiding principles, and then we have like 90-day project-based OKRs that we do. Like we go to our offsites, we define them, and then for the next 9 days we try to solve things. So when we get a new bug notice, a new feature request, we say like, what is the impact of the OKR? What's the level of effort and the level of impact? So that same framework, what's the description of this issue? What's the current workaround? And what's the issue with the current workaround? So we do have this kind of like 7 questions that we answer to define a new feature, or define a new, or to address a bug, for example. And it is like going through that process has been really helpful, because especially the workaround part, where it's like, well, how are you currently addressing this issue? And then what's the issue with that workaround? You find that like there actually is no issue. So it's like it's just a nice to have, but it's not a must have, and the level of effort is high, but the impact is low. It's like we're not doing it. And again, like I mentioned before, when you have that kind of framework to have that discussion, like people are just like, okay, this is how I guess I'll do that piece of my puzzle.
The challenge that I'm seeing is that we're always just looking in front of our feet. We don't really look far enough necessarily with this tool, so that's why we need some different frameworks to to guide everybody long term? Because OKRs is great for, what are we doing now, but the direction of where we're going to, you need some different frameworks. Do you somehow outline the ideal product or the ideal product vision, and how do you communicate it? Like, is that something just on your wall or something that you guys repeat every product meeting? How do you communicate that ideal outcome of your product?
One of the things that I've kind of come to observe with product in general is like at any point in time, and I use this to set expectations with the company as well, and like what we can deliver on as a product team. I think it's consistent with operations or any other department, is like we only know 90% of information at any point in time. So, we do a requirements gathering around an issue, we do some work against it, and then all of a sudden you go into like your QA pass and you missed a bunch of stuff. But like any point in time, we can only really be 90% accurate. I feel like that's kind of like the intangible qualitative number that maybe makes sense to people. Or it just gives me an opportunity to be wrong a bunch and not have to answer it. Either way, it works for me, but the challenge we've had with kind of converting that logic into like, here is the product vision for the next 15 years or whatever it is that like every day we're discovering something new about our users or customers, and it's really hard. I guess like you can be really confident about tomorrow, you can be pretty confident about next week, you can be relatively confident around the month or 3 months later, but like for your confidence level 3 months out is like, or 3 years out is like low. So we've definitely gone down the route of like, well, let's just build a mock-up of like a click-through mock-up and envision of like the entire platform and what it would look like and then ideal state and all that kind of stuff. I kind of think it's a waste of resources at this point in time as a business, because like the guy or group of people who are going to be doing that are better served with some more shorter term things than like this like 3-year plan of what the product may look like. I think what is more important and what we do, so like we do like offsites every 90 days, and like the offsite is intended to be an opportunity for us to like get out of us being reactive day to day, and like let's just spend a day to be super proactive. Like and we kind of have this like sentence that leads us through that day where it's like, close your eyes and imagine what 90 days looks like from now. Like at that point in time, what are the things that had to have happened for that vision 90 days later to be successful? And then we talk about those things. So we do work in like these 90-day kind of major leaps, but at the beginning of that day we always review like our mission statement, what we do and why we do it. And we review it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we want to make sure that it's accurate, meaning we may have learned something in the last 90 days that changes that vision, and we want to make sure that that thing is accurate. And then secondarily, it continues to remind us of like ultimately what the ultimate vision is, independent of the tactical things we do. I've looked online to look at like what is the difference between a vision statement and a why and what and all that kind of stuff, and a mission statement. And like the only where I've found confidence around it is like your mission statement is like your ambition. It's the thing you want to be when you grow up. Kind of that statement of what you do is what you're doing today. What do you do tactically? What do you do tangibly? But your vision or your mission statement is the thing that you have ambition to be. And so that continues to be, let's say, the guiding principle over what product needs to look like, but that has not translated into like, a product mission statement, let's call it.
So I'd love to take it back a little bit on the topic of measurement. I'm not sure if you guys have like a product KPI dashboard, but if you were to advise a company that doesn't have a product KPI dashboard, what metrics would you recommend them start tracking?
So anything around your onboardings, that to me is key. If you're not measuring your onboarding funnels, like you need to get to a point where you are. I remember like maybe five years ago when I started my business, the Hovr business we described at the beginning, I was like obsessed with measuring every possible click because I didn't know any better, and I was like, let's just do it. And we did this large mixed panel implementation, and it was really complex. But at the end of the day, it was just like, it was not focused, right? I thought that as long as we had all this analytics across the entire thing, we know everything. Its lack of focus actually hurts you more. The critical thing, in my opinion, is to sit down with the leaders of the business or a company overall and be like, what are the key 2 or 3 metrics that are super important that drive our revenue growth or growth of users, or like what are the key metrics? Can
you share a little bit more insights in terms of what you guys do, with users that you identified are detractors, for example, versus the ones that are promoters? How do you you look at the NPS, except for tracking it, every quarter, for example. Is there anything actionable that you do, or would you recommend other companies do?
So like we're tracking NPS. We are sending out like NPS surveys when people interact with us. All that information like comes back into Slack, where like we have a couple people who are responsible for monitoring that. And our follow-up is really if we get a score less than 9, we reach out to them to understand like why it was less than 9 or less than 8. I can't remember what number it is. No, we're not more sophisticated than that at this point. I think like, again, NPS is important. We want to make sure that people want to promote us and that we have a strong, that people have a good experience with us, and it is important. But similarly around the topic of priorities, I just don't think that like, let's put it this way, we have a really good handle on that. People are happy, so it's not an issue. If we were getting poor scores, then we would see that it would become a new priority in what we do on day to day, but it's just not a priority because people seem to be happy. Like we perform, we deliver what we say we're going to deliver, people get paid on time, like on the influencer side. Clients and brands are generally happy with the performance of the campaigns, they like working with us, like all that stuff seems to be like we're getting a really good green check mark around the whole thing. So it's not an area of business that we really, like we monitor it, but it doesn't seem to be the thing that we're actively working on because we're already doing a good job at it. It doesn't mean that you should ignore it. If your business is fundamentally being driven by NPS score in some way, then that needs to be one of those key metrics I mentioned. Measuring every single interaction is just, it's not the right thing to do. I don't think it is. I think you just have to like, I talked about sophistication. I think you need to focus on areas that are super important today, resolve those, then you look at the next set of areas that are super important, resolve those, and you kind of like, you can't, if you try to put analytics everywhere, you're just biting off more than you can chew, you'll just drown. Yeah,
you start having confusion, what is a causation, what is correlation?
Yeah, it's just,
yeah, you definitely want to look at only a couple of those.
We're not doing any, like we don't have like a public KPI dashboard per se. That's something that we're going to be working on. Right now, like so we mentioned about like OKRs, so like a lot of the OKRs that have come up in the last, let's say 6 to 9 months have been like, we want to take some process and improve it by 10%, but the key results always change because we're not even measuring these things. So like, how do we know if we're improving them by 10%? And how do we know that that thing needs improvement? Maybe it's already actually working pretty good and it doesn't need improvement. So I think the first question you need to ask is, okay, like what are the things that are critical to be measuring right now? And everything else, it's not that it's not important, but you gotta prioritize. You gotta be able to say no to something.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's just how it goes.
Yeah, we're big believers in measuring retention and churn because to us it's like the ultimate indicator of whether we're delivering the right product to the right customer.
Yeah.
Actually, I read this pretty cool quote, is that churn is a lagging metric of poor product market fit. What is your perspective on that statement?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think it depends on the product. There could be one-time use products, in which case churn doesn't matter as much. There could be products that like the intention is to be sticky, like a CRM, right? If everyone's churning out of it, there's something wrong with your product. Or it could be the behaviors of the people. It's not the right customer, right? So I think that there's a couple pieces to that. Like if your users are churning out the back end, your product isn't right, the value prop is not right, the customers you're going after are not right. So it could be any of those things.
I had a question on pricing. Since you guys operate in the media space, do you guys, historically media has been a challenging space to build reoccurring revenue or subscription revenue. Is that how you guys price your software, on a recurring basis, or is it done on more transactional, like per campaign, for example, basis?
Right now it's per campaign.
But I would imagine you guys look into recurring pricing models as well, right?
I think our bigger focus is understanding what are the things we need to do for repeat business at like a campaign level, or a commitment, like a client to commit spending a year's worth of budget with us versus an individual campaign. We're not a SaaS business, so like our pricing is not, it's not exposed to the same kind of pressures as SaaS would be.
It's kind of like almost a challenge of pricing marketplace, pricing on a subscription basis.
The interesting thing in media is that my observation, at least, and like I'm not going to suggest that this is what everyone else believes where I work, but like my observation is there already exists the benchmarks of how media needs to perform, and you just need to price yourself inside that benchmark. Like, I'm not a salesperson probably because I just said that, right? Like, I don't know, but like my observation of it is like pricing is a function of like what is the performance I need to deliver, and then how do I price myself accordingly.
Yeah.
So in our case, the conversation with the client is around like, what kind of budget would you like to allocate towards an influencer marketing campaign? What are your expectations around performance of that campaign? And then based on those two things, we make a recommendation for like the volume that we can secure. And those, it is, I think in the world of influencer marketing, it's a very different space because it's not programmatic. These are people, they're individuals. You can't just swap them out for the next guy, like the way you could just like swap an ad, for example. So like there's a couple of interesting nuances that we manage. But I think for the most part, the conversation with clients is, I'm buying engagements at X number of dollars engagement. I'm buying app downloads at Y number of dollars per download. These are the metrics that we are being asked to maintain. And so when we go and design a campaign around that, our pricing needs to fit to at least compete with those benchmarks.
So it sounds like for a company that's struggling to understand how to price or maybe potentially reinvent their pricing model, they should really try to identify, what is their true identity or the industry that they operate in, and almost just not try to be something that they're not, almost, right?
Yeah, I think when you talk about like the competitive landscape of a business, it's not just like who else is offering what I'm doing. It's like if they don't spend $1 with me, who else could they be spending it with? So like I would not say that influencer marketing is in competition with like Google ad spend. I just don't see that. I think they're different kinds of marketers who are doing one versus the other. But certainly anyone who's buying like ads on Facebook or stuff like that, like they're going to be looking at how much does it cost me to get an impression in one place versus on Instagram, and if I did an influencer marketing campaign, what does that look like? So I think you just have to be real about like what does the competition want, or how does the competition price themselves? What does the customer want to pay for this thing? And then like you fall in line accordingly. Certainly there's going to be, I'm sure we'll see technologies or companies that are able to provide a service at like a discount relative to what the market is currently paying for something. I think we're already seeing that in influencer marketing. If you look at how much you would pay to have like a professional photographer do a bunch of stuff for you versus an influencer, like night and day in terms of cost, right? But I don't think any of these industries want to see a race to the bottom. So if you have a smart group of people running a handful of companies that define an industry, the best thing they can do is protect each other by not racing to the bottom. But you know how startups are, they're like, oh, we're not race to the bottom. They're going to come in, they're going to be like, I can do this for cheaper, better, faster, all those kind of things. And your success as an early company may disrupt, for lack of a better word, what that industry is doing because they're not protecting the industry. I think it kind of depends. Like Uber came in, and with UberX, they were killing it. Now it's probably more expensive to take an Uber than it is a taxi.
Probably, yeah.
So like, I don't know, they found a way to do that.
So question about growing your team. What do you typically look in people that join your product team?
I think for me, I'm looking for someone who's like organized. Organization is like pretty much number one. Someone who has a good sense of pushing back. Like, tell me about times where people have asked you to do things. How have you managed their expectations? How did you push back on things? How did you reset their expectations? Those kind of skill sets to me are super important in that role. Someone who is very good at asking questions. That to me is critical because, again, I mentioned earlier, like I just don't think people are. I don't think people in general have a very strong skill set around asking questions. People are very eager to solve problems and come up with ideas. They love sitting around a table and talking ideas, but like no one is really good at asking questions. So certainly someone who has a strong inclination towards like why. I think the technical element of it is something you could probably teach. I would say like those are the key skills that I'd be looking for in someone in that role. It also depends on seniority. I mean, like you may find young people who are just like super ambitious and are eager to learn and don't have those skills, but you can see that they have the right personality and like they look at the world in that way.
Yeah. That's awesome. What is one thing about product management that's obvious to you that's not obvious to many other people?
A product owner, let's call it, or product manager, needs to understand that like a feature does not live on its own. It lives in an ecosystem of other features that acts as, let's say, a tool, and that tool then lives amongst a handful of other tools that then define a product experience, right? So it's kind of like this hierarchy, let's call it. And I think that most people don't see that. I think what they see is like, I just need this button to be green. And they don't see, there's a very simple case, obviously, but like they don't see that the changing of that button to green impacts how that tool gets used, and then impacts that tool's interaction with all the other tools, that then impacts the overall product experience. Now changing a button to green, I don't think is going to do anything, but like what I'm saying is there's a very large degree of interconnectivity between these kinds of things, and I think most people don't see that.
To you, what is the number one startup risk?
So I did a presentation in Hamilton on I categorized 8 areas where startups fail, and I went through this whole presentation, and basically I just talked about how I screwed everything up in 8 different categories. There's a handful of places that they fail. I think they fail with the wrong team. They definitely fail with being super focused on the wrong idea. Again, I think it comes down to being able to ask those questions. Wouldn't it be cool if statements are fun, but you really have to decide if that wouldn't it be cool if statement actually creates value for anybody or not. So I had a business that I started before Hovr, which we were medium successful in, let's say, and it was location-based conversations, and we said wouldn't it be cool if, and we built it and we wasted some money and whatever, but no one cared about it, right? I couldn't communicate the value. I couldn't tell you why you would use it, and is the pain worth solving? So I think the funny thing is you'll read about these unicorn companies and stuff like that. If you had to pay for Facebook, you would never. I don't know that it would have got to where it got to, right? There's certain businesses that can be successful because of the business model or whatever, and that works. But that's not. Unicorns are not rules; they're exceptions.
Yeah.
And if you can't try to be can't be just not emulating or making reference to some very successful, I'll just call it unicorn, I'll use the same terminology, and then justify the thing you're going to do, because they are not the rule, they're the exception. Just being as level-headed as possible. I mean, it can come, it also is a function of how risk-averse you are. Are you someone who's just just screw it, let's just try for 5 years and see what happens? Your personal family scenario. I'm married, I have a young baby, my risk tolerance has changed versus what it was when I started my business. So I think there's not the one key thing, there's so many things. Underfunding, wrong team, not tying each other together with contracts. Founders who work together for years and don't have a shareholders agreement is a mistake. It's an uncomfortable scenario, but if you can't have uncomfortable conversations with your partner, with your business partner, you're not gonna be able to handle growth. You're not gonna be able to handle how do we go from 60 to 100, or you're not going to be able to make strong decisions about letting people go and all the other things that exist. If you can't have an initial conversation about a shareholders agreement, maybe you shouldn't be partners.
It sounds like there's a lot of risks associated with startups.
Yeah,
so
they're just.
Why did you start a startup?
I don't know. I watched too much TV and thought it'd be cool. I don't know. I had some ideas and pursuit of one idea became a pivot into something else. Wouldn't it be cool if conversations, all the things I'm saying right now is in hindsight, it's easy for me to say it, but at the time I was naive about the whole thing as well. But it was the experience of going through it was definitely invaluable. I'm glad that I have been able to experience what I've experienced so far. I probably just did it because I had that ambition where I was I just need to see if I could do this thing, or I had this idea that I couldn't remove it from my head, so I just had to pursue it. Yeah. It's a sickness. It's not healthy.
It's like Sam Altman says, you should only start a startup if you can't not start a startup.
Yeah, I can't not do this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, Adam, thanks a lot.
Yeah,
I think this was
fun.
really productive. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, hopefully it made some sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.